2, 3, testing.
Is introduce people, so I'm sorry that I'm a little delayed here. I have with me today 3 very talented ladies. As I said to the first crowd, I always use the cooperation of ladies when I can, but only when they're top-notch people. I never push somebody just because they are a woman. These ladies are every bit as talented as any man I've ever worked with, and I've worked in animation since 1936, non-stop. Helen Komar is going to talk about what the assistants have to do and put up with, and in-betweens and things like that. And we have Nancy Beiman here, who is an animator. She didn't come up the hard way, the way the rest of us did. She's the younger generation that was able to go to a school. When Helen and I started, there were no schools. I don't know about Linda, how you got into the business. How did you happen to be?
By accident.
Well, we all got in by accident, too. Did you go to school for film? Illustration. So the 3 of us had nothing to do in our schooling about film. But Nancy went to the school that Disney uses or sponsors or has something to do with in California. She can talk more about it. And what I would like to say is about the technical side of animation. A lot of people think that they're animators because they put some drawings down and take pictures of them and they move across the screen. And it's true, that's an animated film. But it doesn't answer the problems that come up in professional animation. Anybody can write a story. Anybody can write a song. Anybody can sing. Anybody can do all of these things. Then you come into the quality of it. If you're a writer, can you break up a sentence and program it and diagram it? If you're an artist, do you understand what's going on in your composition and the construction and the underlying things when you do an outline of a character? Do you know where all the muscles and bones and things go? Those are the kind of technical background things that I like to talk about in animation. I'll show you a little bit of it here. We have, start off with a storyboard. I find it, I got disrupted by doing two lectures when I only intended to do one. And I took my materials and just tossed them off to a corner as I was drawing, as I was talking. The storyboard is the illustration of the story. First comes the story idea for a picture. After you get the story written, then you do sketches. Most of the studios use storyboards about this size. And they pin them up on a board in successive drawings around the room until they get their whole story illustrated. These are drawings that my husband Walt Kelly did. Some of them are finally finished like this. I know these are all small for you to see at such a distance. Some of them are just a rough animator's sketch, a quick sketch, to pin down the idea of the characters here moving that way or something like that, with the story itself written below. And when you go on and on until you finish the, I think they're most of it there's another. So it can be anything along this line to illustrate so that the director knows what the story is saying. And the director takes that and puts it on, where my bar sheets are. Here they are. Bar sheets. They call them bar because bar of music. If you were able to see this closely, not only do we have lines going across here, we have these little lines going this way. Each one of these small lines means one picture, one frame of film. Now, if a note of music occurs on a certain frame, maybe the 25th frame into the first foot of film, you count over, after the first foot, you count 25 frames and mark down, and here's the note of music here, as the music's written across the bar. And transversely, as the music is written on this bar, and you want a particular action to happen, you make it above there and count and see exactly what frame it lands on. This is another version of it's a smaller version of a bar sheet. This takes 10 seconds. You can see all at once 10 seconds of action on here and really get an overall view of it. Then you break it down onto an exposure sheet. There are several kinds of exposure sheets too. This one came from Howard Beckerman's studio. Original design. Bar sheet was this way. Exposure sheet is this way. Every line going this way is one frame of film. There's 24 frames of film in 1 second. There are 4 and sometimes 5 layers of celluloid with drawings on them for each frame. You put down your background, and then you put down on top of that a celluloid that's been with the character traced from a drawing, and on top of that another celluloid. In other words, if you want a body to stand still and the arm to move, that would be 2 different celluloids, and you have it, we call them cells from celluloid, one on top of the other. Well, every time you put one down, you have to have it marked on here so the cameraman knows where they go. A held body, for example, will have one number, and you draw the line down from there showing that you're going to not move it. It's going to stay there. And the ones above it are moving. So the cameraman looks straight across the line, and he puts everything down below him, below his camera, on a thing like this. This is from our desk. It's a miniature idea of what the camera is like. The drawing surface here in the center has precision peg bars above and below. Therefore, anything that's drawn on an animation desk, when you put it under the camera, which is a flatbed with the camera above looking down, he puts it on these pegs. It's in exactly the same position, registration, as it was on your board. We have top pegs and we have bottom pegs, and they're on moving bars. So you can slide them back and forth. And that makes for extra special tricks. You have a background, and you want the background to move while the character's, if the character's walking along in place and seems to be right in front of it, in the background you want it to be passing things. The background moves, and the character stands still. When you're looking on the screen, you think that the character's walking past in front and that the camera is following. We call it a panorama. So a long background can be fed through behind the character by moving the pegs. Or the background is just a little square and stays still while the character walks through. The character can be drawn, every drawing separate, or you can do what we call a cycle. So it takes a full step, and then the same drawing's moved over again. When the next time he takes a step, it's the same one, but you have to keep the bar moving then, so that he doesn't keep walking in one spot on the background. These technical things may not interest all of you if you're just artists or anything, but to me it's like composing music, putting it all together and making it work, making it start and stop at a particular moment. Another thing we have to do is write down the camera action. If in this, I don't know if you can see this, I'm sorry we're so far away from each other. Someday I'll make slides so I can project these things and you can see them large. This is a small, this is what we call a 12 frame. This area would be 12 field. Now if you wanted to see the whole thing, you would call for possibly the 12 field, or this is a 10 field, this outside, that shows that that's how much the camera would take. The black area means that's dangerous. On television, it might not be seen. It might be wobbly, or the screen might project it one way or the other. This in the center, you're sure to see. So if you want something to be perfectly legible, you be sure it's within the center section. And if in this case you decided you did not want to see the whole thing, then you would maybe decide you want to see just down here, or maybe just his head. Then you tell that to the cameraman by writing it on your exposure sheet. You say 5 field north instead of right in the center. Here would be center. You want only that amount of space, but you want it up here and over here, north and, what would that be, east. Do it like a map.
What are the numbers really referring to?
Pardon?
What are those numbers really referring
To the size of the field. The field, if it were a 12, is 12 inches across and proportioned this way. This one, large one, is 10 field. Therefore, it's 10 inches from this side to this side. And the 5 field is 5 inches. And the northwest, north, south, east, and west is according to how you move it on the, within the area of the 12. That's enough technical boring things. These ladies have the lovely picture things to show you. The animator, which we have Nancy here to demonstrate, gets to do all the emotional part as far as the storytelling. An animator has to be an actor or actress.
As I said before, we get to have all the fun.
You do.
We are given the layouts and the directions, and then we just go ahead and do exactly as we please, because we're the stars of the picture, as we're also fond of saying. No, really, we couldn't go anywhere without the layouts. And the backgrounds don't have to. I attended the California Institute of the Arts in Los Angeles and was trained in college to do this. A few years ago there was no such training, so instead of coming up through the ranks of the field, I did come in as an animator. And I work now as Anders Animation for New York. We did the Gnome special, which is on the network, I believe, of course. I brought along stuff from my student days because I have more, simply because I have more of it than professional work. Although I did, for mistake appearances, bring along one cell from the gnomes. So none of them could see him. Now, the thing about this I wish to point out is acting is an integral part of animation. And normally when you're acting in real life, one does search for someone who can cast someone for the part. Now, I don't want too much like this guy. But I did a lot of footage on him, and I really enjoyed working with him and the villains and trolls. In animation, it doesn't matter if you're young or old. If you can draw the character, you can play him. So you're not restricted to any particular kind of role. The voice talent is a major plus to any animated character, but basically it is the animator, basically it's how it moves that counts in an animated film, not how it sounds, how it looks and how it moves. To aid in character development, we sometimes make these ridiculous toys. I did sculpt this. It isn't just here for laughs. This is a character I did at CalArts. To help me draw him, I sculpted him. Now, in addition to being a great thing to show people when you're trying to get a job, you can also turn him around if you want to draw how he looks from underneath. You get a nice feeling of working in the round because, of course, the character does not exist. At least with him, I have the opportunity of going to look at a real horse. But if you're doing a Martian or a troll, it's a little hard to study them in real life. So a statue is a nice thing to have. From there, go on designing your own characters, which in the case of the student film I was. This is called a model sheet, and all cartoons have them. What happens is, since you have a great many artists working with the same characters, you have to have somebody who decides what they look like, and how many hairs they have on their head, how many teeth, what sort of facial expressions they can have. And they make up every conceivable view, or every necessary view of the character. Front, back, and side is generally rather inadequate. You need to know what does this character look from the bottom, top, three-quarter views. Because you have to be able to turn it, create the illusion of a third dimension in a character that does not exist. So this is just, also you have comparisons between this character and the other characters in the picture, so you don't have them growing or in relation to one another through the picture. This is for a student film, so it is what's called a rough model sheet. Normally, a professional production could have rough models, but also would have assistants do what's called a cleanup of this. As you can see, there are discrepancies in the drawing. Let me see. Helen will tell you more about what cleanup is. From there, we would get, this doesn't matter much to animation, but they would go into color models. So you probably see the characters a tiny bit better when they're in color. This picture was not meant to be done in color, but I did models anyway. We get the voice tracks recorded before we do the animation. This is invaluable because unless you're having what's called a voiceover narration, you must have the track in advance to be able to make them talk. What we do is we take those exposure sheets Selby was showing you. We get a phonetic reading hello, how many frames it takes to say each syllable. The editor breaks it down phonetically. We then do our drawings matching them precisely to where the soundtrack hooks up. The sheets have the numbers to match them up so that everything synchronizes when it's put together. But we don't hear it with the drawing, and we cannot see it actually move until we shoot what's called a pencil test. I would take some of the drawings I do on papers and film them with a backlight behind them. I'll give an example of what an animator would do. An animator doesn't do every single drawing in the picture. He would only do what are called the extremes. An extreme can best be described as the beginning and end of an action. Now, I'm doing a kind of an apprehensive looking horse here. This could be drawing number 1. I would put another sheet on top of it. I'm only using this as an illustration. If I wanted to have him react, I would make sure that the basic shape of the horse's head is changed, but he would basically take up the same amount of volume as he does on the previous drawing if I were doing this on a real disc. So you change the drawing in some way, and you decide how long it's going to take him to do that. Now that would maybe be pretty fast, so this would be drawing number 1. This would probably be drawing number 4. Now there's 3 drawings not there. So that I'd leave for my assistant to do if I was feeling very lazy, which usually I have other things to do, actually. If it's simple stuff, I would leave it. This stuff, I'd really do some drawings myself. This is called a chart. You put this on one of your extremes. Drawing number 3 is midway between drawing number 1 and number 4. The assistant can see that easily now. Drawing number 2 is midway between drawing number 1 and number 3. So that's what those little hash marks are on the corners of your Preston Blair drawings, if anyone has them. So the assistant would take that, put the 2 drawings on top of one another, and put on the backlight, and do drawing number 3. When you finally flip them like a flip book, you get the illusion of motion, but you don't actually see the way it's going to look on the screen because you have no way of timing the drawings. A flip book, all the pages move at the same speed, and you might want to hold the drawing for a few minutes. So that's why we shoot what are called pencil tests. Pencil tests are the actual drawings. They're put on a camera, and they're essentially exactly what you see in the theater, except there's no color. And everything is transparent because you're shooting the actual drawings. So characters walk through one another, and generally we don't worry about planning until it's the color. Because if you, of course, have a character supposed to walk in front of somebody on a walk behind them because you didn't plan it right, it doesn't matter in a pencil test, but it would certainly show in color. So
While he's getting this, explain a little about easing in and out instead of having direct.
Oh, yeah, this-
Just on a graph.
this graph is called slowing out. In drawing, if you do everything evenly, everything sort of floats. Your action will all be fluid, and it'll be very, very dull if it's all like that. That's best on inanimate things like clothing, but even that will have. Now, usually, if you want to lead into a strong pose, this is called slowing out. That means there are more drawings at the head of the action. Slowing out of that movement I just did. Slowing into something is just the opposite. That means you start off at a faster rate than you wind up. So that's learning how to do that with different parts of the body is what constitutes learning how to animate. I wouldn't have all this happen at once. You wouldn't have pose, pose, pose. You'd have a hand moving at a different rate than the head, than the foot. That's known as overlap.
We got.
Okay, this is a pencil test, as I've said, so it may be a little hard to see. It was impossible to see last time as well. That's why you don't see them in the theaters, because they're rather hard to see. But you are going to be looking at the actual drawings. It has a soundtrack, though. And this is what all cartoons look like before they go into color. Since we were students, we did not actually finish the films. But this is sort of the levels of all animated cartoons. Drawings here from the pictures, you can see what I'm actually talking about with drawings, punch paper. And in this case, all three characters are on the same level, as it's called, because they were all touching each other, and I found it easier to draw them that way. Usually put her on a different piece of paper. And that you can see that most of the time when there was something showing through, it's because there was something on the top level of paper, and the bottom level was showing through it. Because the light from behind made it transparent. A couple thousand drawings in the scene, they would all move once you flipped it. These are some extremes. Okay. Any questions? I think Scott wants to ask a question. Yes? I used up about 5,000 sheets of paper or so. Possibly 6. I don't remember. I bought about 15 reams of paper, 15 reams, 500 sheets. Not that much. Yeah, you know, it's a considerable amount because you've got 24 frames a second, but there's sometimes 4 levels going on there. So that means different character animated on 4 sheets of paper at once. Instead of 1 drawing per frame, you got 4.
Do you have a way of checking the kind of motion that you're going to get before you actually do the pencil test? I mean,
You mean acting it out? Oh, yeah, sure, you flip the scene. You can see if it looks like it's moving all right, but I've had many people flip myself and say, oh, I don't know, go shoot it. It depends on your timing. It depends on whether you hold or not. Because you can't hold and flip both unless you stop flipping and say, okay, I'm going to hold this for a second, and then resume flipping the scene.
Part of your timing can be done by using a stopwatch. Now, you're talking about maybe, she's talking about fine timing. But if you get your storyboard and the words and the action, you take a stopwatch and you go through the action and see how long it takes you. That gives you an idea. Do a take and flip your stopwatch to see how many seconds or what portion of a second it takes you to do that. Then you allot that on your timesheet. Then after you've done your animation, if it doesn't come anywhere as near that, you go back and rework it until you get what you think is going to be fine, using the stopwatch or metronome. A lot of the old-time animators used metronomes.
A lot of animators like to act their stuff out. Now, in the case of someone smashing through a barn, I prefer not to act these things out. They have invented something called the Lion Lamb video camera, which films it on a television screen. You put these pencil drawings down, you film it, you play it back 20 seconds later, and that's what this film was done with. It was animated in a little less than 5 months. And that camera is a godsend because you don't have to wait for the developing time, you don't have to bother a cameraman, you can work it yourself. Anyone who can operate a video machine can operate on land.
So that's what these kids know, that it wasn't done that way in my day, in the older times. We had to wait days to see it. Go ahead.
When you do your final overlay, is the transparency on like celluloid?
This would not, what you just saw is
The
final
final.
pencil test. The final film would be the exact same drawings on a celluloid, which is this is a cell on a
Now,
background.
you have to outline them again, or do you just paint it over your drawing and just ink it over?
Well, that's something that Helen will talk to you about right now, because that's another department. So we animators are supposed to come down with the gestures and the acting and the feeling and the passion. The artwork comes from another department.
The technical part comes, our next speaker will be Helen, and then you can ask us all questions afterwards. Helen Komar is a professional assistant. Now, she can do all these other things, but she enjoys, as she said, and I'll let her speak for herself. She enjoys being an assistant. Very much.
Well, I started in the 1950s as an in-betweener. And
Explain what in-betweener.
Oh, an in-betweener is you take down the rough action, which is pinned down by the animator, and we fill in the drawings, which I'll demonstrate later. But I just wanted to point out that in the 50s, an in-betweener was as far as a lady could go in the animation industry. We were not allowed to become assistants, or an animator was just out of the question, because it takes such a long time to train to get into an assistant animator that by the time a young lady would be trained, she was ready to get married and have children and go home, and you're left without any more And in those days, they didn't have any schools also, so that we have to train on the job. And in the in-between department, we would learn from each other. And it was a very happy family unit. And we had a lot of fun, and we took our time because we worked on theatrical commercials at that time. All the 7-minute cartoons that were held in theaters in between double features. But as the commercials came into being, there were deadlines and frustrations, and we just couldn't cope with that, so we had to really work hard. Also, with the coming of commercials, new styles of animations came into being, and with that, new women did enter into it and were developed and became very innovative and very exciting. I alternate between animation and assisting. I like assisting because I love to see lines, clean lines develop and make the character look like the character and give a little more life and personality into the character that is developed by the animator. An animator does a very, very rough outline of his scene. I'll just flip. This is cleaner than rough. I don't know if you can all see back there.
You've all seen flip books. That's what an animator has to do with his work all the time, is flip it.
To find out what timing of the action, what they're doing, character. Now, another one. But today, all the students have schools, so when they're ready to go into a job, they are accepted as assistants and animators, which is why the field is opening up in all aspects. Here is a pencil, a rough action of an animator. See, this is really Rosie, 1973. There was a special about it. And this is the animator's rough action. I started working at famous studios with Popeye and Audrey and Casper and Beiman, and worked full time at that. And now I've gone into TV commercials, and I think I've drawn every serial there is to be animated for TV. And all oh, clarify. This is a scene that has very clean lines. These drawings are done very accurately and cleanly because they are Xeroxed on celluloid.
But the assistant has already finished with this.
Yes.
See, an animator who draws more roughly to give emotion and not to worry about the pinning it down, hands it to an assistant. An assistant has to be able to make it look good and not lose any of the emotion that the animator has put into it.
On the character. Now, this is Xerox on a celluloid. All the very same drawing you saw on paper was Xerox and painted. And they're ready to be shot with a performing background behind it. This is a held man. He's not moving, so I just put one going at him. But the lady is moving and talking, and she has to move. And everything has to be done very accurate. Yes.
What is the usual kind of ratio you have between the number of drawings that the animator hands you and the number
I generally put in 3 drawings to his streets. Add 3 drawings.
And what kind of ratio then is there from your drawings to the film?
Well, they're just whatever my drawings have completed the scene, and then they're passed on to the Xerox and the color. When I finish drawing, the whole action is taken care of, then it goes down to production.
But is it framed, does the film frame correspond one-to-one with that?
Oh, no, it's usually shot on 2s, we say. In other words, one drawing will be held for 2 shots because of the speed that your eye catches the film frames as they go past. You don't need to have every frame a new drawing. And like with the body, it may be held for 64 frames while the other things are moving. And also if they're going to gesture, they might point, for this is what Nancy was saying, you might want to hold it. So flipping doesn't really show that. If you want to hold for a second or 2 before you go on into other motions.
And these are just the gnomes that was featured on November, a half-hour feature. And Raggedy Ann and Andy, which was a full-length feature picture of a few years ago that I ended up with work on that, just to show you what I've done.
When Helen is working, she takes the not only takes the animator's drawings and makes them cleaned up and precise, and so that the eyes are all the proper size and shape, and the buttons are all on there and everything. She will leave in-betweens if they're not extreme action, if they're not unusual action, if they're directly in between, then she will leave those for the beginning people that are in-betweeners, and that's the way most people just learn, come to the studio and do the in-between drawings.
Since I've done serial commercials, I think you'll recognize the character here. Also, when I'm working, I must, because I've drawn so many characters over the years, I cannot, from my mind, remember how each one fits, so I refer to a layout, so that I'll make these characters accurate and conform to the way the designer has created these characters. Now, this is at the stage that the animator leaves his drawings for me. You've got the pose, you've got the expression, and along with the exposure sheet, I know what he's saying, so that I'll open his mouth up to the way the exposure sheet goes for whatever happens in the talking. Now, this will take me a couple minutes to this. On a regular cleanup for production, it would take me from 10 to 15 minutes to do one character pose to make each line very accurate, with fitting it in the right position, concentrating on that character. It makes each drawing have to be a work of art in itself, because it's reproduced many times and it's shown on the screen, so that everything follows.
When I first started at Disney's, everything was ink. There were no Xerox machines. And the lines could be drawn much more roughly by the assistants, by the animators, because it was the job of the inker to go back and perfect them and give them the proper thick and thin, and not extend them too far into the body or leave these little rough edges. Nowadays, the assistant has to do perfection in each drawing.
Now, to give you an idea of how animation actually works when we're breaking down action. I'm going to have Casper, the friendly ghost, which is a simple character, walk. And on our drawing number 1, which is an extreme, he wears a sheet over him, that's why he's a ghost. You can't really see his legs. Now, if you are given these two extremes to work from, after we clean them up, we make our third in between flipping. From number 1 and into 2, and we have to visualize what takes place in between, and we visualize. And this is how we make our in-betweens. And breaking down the action all the way down. The eye is here, the eye is here, so I can make a middle. Other eye is just almost. We slowly turn his head into a profile. His left foot is being raised by flipping, you can see it. His left foot is coming down. And the other one is just lifting, you can barely see it. The left arm is over here, and it's swinging, so it's just dropping midpoint. Everything's midpoint. And this is why they're known as in-betweeners, because it's the in-between two streams of action, and break it down and over. And of course, we clean it up. Like this. And this is the basics of all animation. And in animation, if there's any students or artists that eventually would like to go into animation, they have to know how to draw everything under the sun, because everything in any cartoon or commercial is always something that's moving. And it just makes it easier to move a tree, exaggerated flowers, buildings, animals, a lot of animals, and of course people. And it starts with just drawing people, because people are the basis of all animated commercials. Thank you.
And we're going to show some film that Helen worked on. And while she's talking, and while we're waiting for it to get started, I want to say more about what Helen said about drawing everything. You not only have to know the shape and construction of everything, you have to watch how it moves. That gives you guys a good reason for watching the ladies. We're just studying my animation. Ask us any questions while we're gathering up our things, please do. These ladies were so good to come up here and help me today, and they didn't expect to do two. Like, you generally speak when they go back and do it over. There's an old joke in this industry that isn't really a joke, it's a practice. In a lot of the studios, they do something wrong so that the ad agency can come and say, oh, everything's fine except that. Because they have to find something wrong. They can't just say it's all great. They say, I don't like that. You already know that they're not going to like that, so you have already changed the thing.
I never work in that industry because I'm always great.
Oh, I see. Yeah, have to be imperfect to be perfect. Is there any other questions? Does anybody want?
I noticed in the commercial where Foley and they use pencil. I think they use pencil on
There's grease pencil in some color.
You can use pencil if you use a frosted cell. I've worked in pictures in California where they use regular pencil and colored pencils, and then you lacquer it, and it becomes clear. It also seals the pencil onto it.
They can also render on paper and transfer the paper cells. I don't know, so render.
Oh, cutting out.
They have stored, magic marker on paper, the drawings on the cells, cutting out the story. Because if you put it on it, you get that paper look, but still put it on the cell.
What kind of paint stays on the cell?
It's a special paint. We used to have a great deal of trouble. I worked in the paint lab at Disney for 6 years. In those days, when it was humid weather, the paint would all stick, and when it was dry weather, it all fall off. Now they use latex. And it doesn't, it'll last for years itself and bend without it chipping, and it doesn't stick together.
What kind of paint did you use in the old days?
It was a gum arabic base, and part of it was twister if it was too dry, and alcohol if it was too wet. It never worked too well. Had to photograph it within the confines of the container. Oh yes, it's all water. It's all water. Like latex water. Although you can't wash it off with water. Actually, it's water when you're originally using it.
I want to just add my personal special thanks to our guest today for going with the flow here and giving us a second show. I really appreciate that, and I thought it was really great.